Hi guys, I am going to show you really quickly how to do the basic photo editing for Photoshop or in Photoshop. I know a lot of you guys were interested in learning about it, so I'm just putting a little quick tutorial together for you. When you open up Photoshop, it's going to ask you to either create a new project or open something that you already have. You can actually access Lightroom photos that you've uploaded. You can access your cloud documents, things that you've deleted, or just go search in your computer by clicking open. Totally up to you. I am going to select something I already have in Lightroom, and I'm going to select this one because it's the white balance is off, and I think you'll see the biggest difference here when we start messing around with it. So I'm going to select that and go ahead and import it. And here we go. It's giving me my layout here. So there's a couple of different ways that you can start messing or adjusting the settings here in Photoshop. Photoshop deals in layers, number one. So you'll see here there's a background layer already set. I want to keep that background layer because it's going to have the original photo. When I make an adjustment to something like exposure or white balance or whatever it might be, what you want to do is add an adjustment layer so that it adds a new layer and it doesn't mess with the original photo. So what you would do is come down here to this little circle here, click it, and then you click whatever adjustment it is that you want to make. Remember, we don't do a whole lot of adjustments when it comes to Photoshop or when it comes to just editing photos for photojournalism. I will suggest starting with exposure as usual. You can click exposure and then see it created a whole new layer here. And then here's the slider to adjust your exposure. Brighten it or darken it. This photo doesn't really have an exposure problem. This photo has a white balance problem. So I'm not going to mess with the exposure in this photo. It really doesn't bother me. The way you can get rid of a layer if you've created it is just select it and delete it. Or you can just hit this little trash can button. You just need to make sure that that layer is highlighted or selected. What I do want to mess with next are curves. Curves are actually a lot easier than what they probably appear, and I've really come to like them and love them. Curves are really easy to understand. Just think of this as on this original page, on this first time that you see this curve, and you want to make sure that this is selected on RGB. This is going to be your opportunity to fix any lighting issues or bring out your highlights and your shadows or your blacks and your whites. So here's how you're going to look at this graph here. Over here you can see this is kind of gradient toward white. These are your highlights. Over here are your dark black colors, so these are your shadows, and these are your mid-tone colors, okay? So this is this axis right here. This way, vertically, you have the same thing. You have lights up here and you have darks up here. Think of this as adding or subtracting. So, for instance, if I wanted to make my shadows brighter, let me come over here to my shadows area. I'm going to click somewhere on this diagonal line in the shadows area and put a little keyframe. All I did was click on it. Now let's say I want to brighten up those darker areas, those shadows. I'm going to add. So I'm going to click on that little keyframe that I created and slide it up. Now it's messing and adjusting with my shadows. But look what happened over here. It also adjusted my midtones and it adjusted my highlights. I want to bring down my highlights. I don't need them to be any brighter than what they already are. So I'm just going to make a little keyframe here and bring that back down and adjust it as needed. Okay. Now this is just an example. Obviously this photo does not look good. But your whole point is to kind of balance this out until this makes sense. This has kind of created a very slight S curve, and I actually like this. I brought actually some of these shadows over here, you can see what happens when I, can see what happens when I make them darker. But if I just put it maybe right there, that's kind of nice. And then my midtones, I can kind of adjust these a little bit and bring them out. So S-curves are really kind of fun, and they're not difficult to understand, right? As long as you know these are my highlights, these are my midtones, these are my shadows, this is to add, and this is to subtract, right? Let's fix the white balance here. This is too blue. Before you start messing with the white balance and with the coloring here, there's something important that you need to understand about colors and color channels. Red brings in the opposite, cyan. Red's opposite is cyan. The opposite of green is magenta. The opposite of blue is yellow, and vice versa. So just keep that in mind. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to change this and come down to blue. I think my photo is too blue. So what I want to do is decrease the blue. But what the computer is going to do is automatically add yellow to it. When I subtract blue, it's going to add yellow. And watch what happens when I subtract blue from this photo and add yellow. I'm going to specifically work with my highlights right now. See, I'm adding blue. I want to subtract it and add yellow. Look how much nicer this photo is already starting to look. You can also do it in your midtones area if you like. I'm going to do it from the midtones here. That's kind of nice. But I really like what it did with my highlights. Okay. Then if you look at it and you go, you know what, this might be a little too green, or I want to mess with the greens here. I'm going to come over to my greens. Remember, what is green add? Magenta. So just keep that in mind. If I bring down my greens, see how all of a sudden it starts turning my picture magenta? It's adding magenta to it. But if you mess with it just enough, you'll find the right balance. Now, if I come down here to my layers, and then the same thing with red, by the way. If you want to mess with your reds, it's going to add cyan. Oops. There we go. I think that looks really nice. If you come down here to your layers, check out what happens when you click this little eyeball down here on my curves layer. It shows me the original. It's gonna hide everything that I just did. I can bring it back, don't worry. But look how much nicer the color looks in this photo. Now you can keep adjusting and messing with it. This is really gonna be just kind of eyeballing it and looking at, at your photo and what clearly looks correct. Now, if you want to undo or reset your adjustments to where it was at the beginning at default, you can just click this button and it'll let you reset, which is really nice. So once you're finished here messing with your levels, which I think are the easiest way, it avoids you having to, mess around with the histogram so much. I just really like this way of fixing the white balance and the exposure and the highlights and the shadows. I just think it's really intuitive here. What you can do once you're finished is come up here to File. Actually, let me show you a couple more things. Let me show you cropping. So if you click the crop tool up here, what's neat is you can change the ratio, the aspect ratio. So if you're doing Instagram photos, which most of us are, you can do it to a 1x1 square, a 4x5, a 5x7, and it's going to adjust for you. So I'm going to keep it at a 1x1. You can click and drag your photo as needed. So if you wanted to put it in the rule of thirds, and put your subjects in the rule of thirds, you can do that as well. Once you're finished, you can hit return, and it's going to crop your photo for you. Okay. All right. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to export it. Let's just say I'm ready to export. So file, export. You can do it one of two ways. You can quick export this as a PNG file, which works really well for TV. Like if you're going to put a photo, somebody's photo on TV or on a movie file, that works really well. I'm going to do export as so that I can show you a couple of more things. Here it's confirming your size. It's a 1x1, right? Over here, you can change the format. You can export it as a PNG, a GIF, an SVG file, or a JPEG. We're going to keep it as JPEG. Again, the quality, just like in Lightroom, I suggest you change it to 80%. 80%, the difference between 80% and 100% on the web is really not that great of a difference. So you're going to be fine at 80%, and it's going to give you a little bit of a smaller file. Let's see, I don't think I'm going to mess with anything else here. On the metadata, though, this is cool. You can add a copyright and contact information into your metadata, which is neat. And I think that's about it. I think that's all I'm going to do here. And then I'm just going to click export. I'm going to give it a name. Oops. Test white balance. Right. I'm going to put it on my desktop, press save, and there you go. And then you're finished. And here is the photo. Now there's still some blue in here that we can continue adjusting, right? But you get the idea. Sometimes, just like in Lightroom, you're going to run into issues where there's only so much you can do before you say, you know what, I just need to go in and retake a photo because I just didn't have the right settings. There's only so much editing you want to do in Photoshop as a photojournalist. So just keep those things in mind. If it's just not working out for you and it's not looking like you want it to, then just try retaking the photo and see where that gets you. Practice makes perfect with photography and with editing.